and good night again, everybody. I have already introduced myself, so we'll sort of move right along. Let me just tell you before we delve into the matter for tonight that I have a tendency to speak very quickly, and so please stop me if you find that I am speaking too quickly, because I want to make sure that that we're all together on the same page whilst we go through the presentation. So my topic for this module is conflict, negotiation, advocacy, and representation. So this is what we will be going into tonight. I do hope that I can make justice of the task before me. So let me just start off by saying that all of these topics, though it sounds like four separate topics, advocacy, representation, conflict, negotiation, they are actually very related in their context and in their importance to our role as fisher organizations, in our role as fisher representatives, within our organization and within our country. So they may sound like a mouthful, but they actually work and merge very nicely together if we understand the role of each one of them and where we fall vis-a-vis what they are. So can everybody see the screen? Everybody can see the screen?
Yes, I can see.
Yes.
Okay, all
Yes,
right.
Kay.
Okay, so we
Here,
start with
I'm not
conflict.
hearing it's dropping in and out.
We begin with conflict. And then we say that conflict, we try to define what is a conflict. And we say that conflict is something that is inevitable. Within your organization, within my organization, we have people, whether it is the persons at leadership level, whether it is the members, whether it is the different other organizations external to us that we have to work with, be it the government, be it the fisheries department, it's made up of people. And so by virtue of these organizations, by virtue of our interactions being with people, there is a level of conflict that will always come into play. And so we establish here that conflict is inevitable. And what is a conflict? A conflict is a disagreement or an argument or an opposition of interests. Note well here that in defining what a conflict is, we have not personalized it to the I, the he, the me, the them. It's about the issue, for example, the interest. So a conflict will arise because there is a disagreement or an argument due to opposition of interest. And that is very important to bear in mind. Where do conflicts arise from? And eventually in the presentation, we'll understand how to manage conflicts. But in order to do that, we need to understand the sources of conflicts. So I'm looking at four broad sources of conflicts here. We look at conflicts due to or arising from relationships. So based on relationships, we'll have, say, personality clashes, we will have difference of opinions. Like I said, within an organization, we have a hierarchy, for example, or we have persons with different backgrounds who come together and pool their resources to form these organizations, to form these bodies. And because everybody's coming from a different background, people have different levels of education, different levels of experience and understanding. You look at the fisher vis-a-vis the perhaps the somebody at the management level who perhaps doesn't know much about the fishing industry in terms of the actual tasks involved in a day-to-day fishing expedition, for example, but that person's strength is probably in management. There will be conflict because there will be differences of opinions. So a typical example would be that the fisherman would say, we need to deploy a FAD at 10 nautical miles. That's where the FAD should be deployed. This is the best place where fish is we can aggregate the fish and so on. But from a management standpoint, you will bring up the question of cost. You'll bring up the question of maintenance. These questions will come about. We can see a conflict developing from there because we're looking at the same argument. We're trying to achieve the same goal, which is putting fishing aggregate devices, deploying fishing aggregate devices to increase the fish catching capacity of the fisher. But there is a difference in opinion based on the advantages or disadvantages of deploying it at a particular place or in a particular way. So a conflict can arise from that. We have conflicts arising from information, and I have here misinformation and I have lines of communication. So as much as we say that conflicts can arise from information, sometimes it is actually misinformation. So somebody has conveyed the wrong information, or somebody has interpreted what you've attempted to, the information that you're attempting to give them, in a wrong way. Again, it probably has to do with personality, it probably has to do with understanding, it probably perhaps has to do with the media that you use to communicate, to pass on the information, and that can cause misinformation. We look at as well lines of communication. If we do not understand within our organization where the line of communication lies, who reports to who answers to who's answerable to who can you take a directive from, that sort of thing, then there will be conflicts that will arise from communication or information being misinterpreted or being handed down from the wrong person or from the wrong area within the organization. Then we have conflict arising from interests. Within the organization, we are supposed to be working towards a goal. We have our goals, and in, I think, was it the previous module, we looked at goal setting, we looked at objectives, we looked at vision and mission. When we become part of the organization, the vision and the mission of the organization should guide our actions, should guide our behavior. However, we also understand that, again, because we have different personalities, which is one of the places where conflict can arise from, it means there may also be differences in interests, okay? If you look at the stakeholders within an organization, because the stakeholders are different, then there will be differences in the interests of the stakeholders. So you look at a fishing organization, for example, if I could use my own situation as an example. We have Goodwill Fishermen's Cooperative. We have to work alongside the Department of Fisheries. We have to work alongside the Ministry of Agriculture, for example. There are our members that we serve. Conflicts can arise from anything within the organization based on the interests of the different stakeholders. So the Department of Fisheries, Rita, for example, who is with the Department of Fisheries, her major role may be conservation of the fishery. So hence the reason why the Department of Fisheries will issue a close and open season for lobster, for example. But for the fisher, his immediate issue may be his ability to harvest the lobster, sell the lobster in order to make the money. Clearly, there is a conflict because one person is advocating management of the resource, while the other person's interest is in harvesting the resource and making money. So a conflict will inevitably arise from that. We also look at a source of conflict being structures. And again, interests will also influence things such as resource allocation. But management structure is very important. And you find that organizations with weak management structures will be organizations where conflicts will arise almost on a regular basis because there is not a structure to determine who does what, how this is done, what are the rules, what are the policies, what are the regulations and the guidelines to determine what we can do in a given situation, what guides us in a given situation, where do we seek the authority for a decision in a given situation, and that can cause conflict. So the question then, conflict then sounds like something that is very negative. So is there a place for conflict within your organization? And I dare say that yes, there is a place for conflict. Bearing in mind in the first slide, we said that conflict is inevitable. So if it is inevitable and we can't do away with it, we might as well piggyback on the conflict in such a way that it can yield some level of positive feedback for us. So one of the advantages of conflicts is that it can create an avenue for problem identification. If within the organization we have persons who constantly yes everything, so somebody brings a motion at a board meeting, somebody raises a motion and everybody agrees yes to it, but so nobody brings their own personal perspective, their own perspective based on their experiences. You may find that these are very well the decisions that are so flawed that eventually down the line, they can cause the collapse or the disintegration of the organization. However, if there is a level of, if we allow perhaps the conflict to, the differences of opinion, which is one of the sources of the conflict, if we allow it then to come to the fore in a manageable manner, though, we can help identify problems that will eventually prevent us from having perhaps organizational disintegration in the long run. So conflict can serve as a means of problem identification. First, on problem solving skills. So we've identified a problem, and so we then need to identify how do we solve that problem. If there is a proper structure within the organization to deal with conflicts, there is proper leadership, and we did leadership in a previous module. If there is proper leadership within the organization, then conflict will actually help us be able to sit down, identify the problem, and identify, okay, here is the problem we're presented with. How do we then solve the problem? Eventually, what you will develop is a cadre of persons within the organization who now have the level of problem solving skills that will enable our decisions and our actions to be a little more sound, and thus enable our organizations to grow and become more resilient. Conflicts can also help build healthy relationships. So as we sit around a table to solve the problems, what we should be doing, or what we could be doing in the process, is actually building healthy relationships where people understand that it's not about the me, it's not about the I, it's about the we within the organization. And if we want that organization to grow and develop, if we want that organization to be sustainable, then we now have to learn how to work with each other amidst the differences in opinions and the differences in positions. Improve productivity, because as you identify problems, you solve the problems, you build these relationships that help you work better with each other. It means you spend less time dealing with rebuilding things that have been broken because conflict have gotten out of the way and caused disintegration. And of course, what all of us can take out of that is a level of personal growth, which is an added bonus of being in an organization and working in a group. So the big question is, how do we resolve conflicts within the organization? Because we have identified that conflicts will happen. We've identified that conflicts can, if left unmanaged, can cause a level of disintegration within an organization. So then the question then becomes, how do we manage conflicts? How do we resolve conflicts within the organization? And resolving conflicts is really the ability to be able to negotiate. Each of us have a different interest. Each of us have a different viewpoint. Each of us have a different opinion on how the thing should be or should not be, a different perspective on it. The question is, how could we sit down? How could we negotiate? How could we do what is called a give and take so that we can arrive at a best decision for the organization. So I've presented two ways in which we can resolve the conflicts. One of them is conflict management. So in conflict management, which is slightly different from conflict resolution, is that you try to limit the negative aspects of the conflict and you try to increase the positive aspects. So as you identify the problem, you determine what causes the negativity, what brings about the negativity in the problem. Is it a difference of opinion? Is it a difference of interest? And you try to decrease the negativity and improve the positivity. So that will help you manage the conflict. And then there is conflict resolution, where we recognize the differences. We recognize that the conflict can become like an explosion if we don't manage it. And so we decide, let us resolve the conflict, which is where we reach at a peaceful resolution to whatever differences we have, whatever created the conflict in the first place. And then that now would bring us into our next topic, because for us to be able to resolve conflict, whether it is through conflict management or conflict resolution, there has to be a high level of negotiation taking place in order for us to be able to do that solving. Okay, so we have this matrix here that looks at these aspects of negotiation and how do we resolve the conflicts. So the matrix gives us 5 different approaches that we could use in order to help resolve the conflict. And if you look at the axis on the matrix, it looks at the importance of the relationship, and it looks at the importance of achieving the goal. So avoiding. And avoiding is a matrix, is a combination of low importance of relationships and low importance of achieving goals. So this is the avenue we are going to use to resolve the conflict. So what we do is we avoid the conflict altogether. Okay? It says that one or both parties seeks to suppress the conflict. So we suppress it, we push it under the mat, like we would say in colloquial language. We pretend it does not exist. Does it really solve the problem? It may not solve it, it may not resolve it, but it may manage it. But again, if we recognize that this strategy could only be used if the importance of achieving the goal is low, and if the importance of the relationship is low. Because if we value the goal that we've set out to achieve, and if we also value the relationship that is created within the space that we're working with, in that case, which will be our fisher organizations, then we recognize that this may not be the best method to use, because if we avoid the elephant in the room, the elephant will always remain in the room and continue to shadow us. We look at accommodating, and accommodating is the combination of high importance to the relationship. So you're trying here to preserve the relationship, but there is low importance to achieving the goal. So accommodating tells us that one party yields the win to the other party. So I say, well, this doesn't mean too much for me. This relationship doesn't mean too much. This achieving the goal, sorry, doesn't mean too much to me. So you know what? You win. I give up. I leave it alone to you. All right. Then we have compromise, which is sort of a midway between the two parties, where both parties win and give up something. So you ask yourself, what am I willing to give up in order to resolve the conflict? What am I willing to give up in order that we get past this juncture that we're at, that is creating conflict within the organization? Then we look at competing, which is a combination of high importance of achieving the goal and high importance of the relationship. And in competing, it is where one party seeks to satisfy the interest regardless of the impact to the other party. So this is where you basically say that I don't care what it means to you, but to me, this is what it means. And so I will resolve the conflict in the way that I feel is best to resolve it. Just a second here. Okay, and we have the last one, which is collaborating. And collaborating is where both parties seek a win situation. So we look at the situation, we look at what is causing the conflict, and we ask ourselves, how could both of us, or how could all of us as stakeholders come out of this with all of us being satisfied with the outcome of it? So that is where you require a high level of negotiation, a high level of communication, in order to be able to resolve the conflict in collaboration. Okay, so what is your role as a leader in resolving conflict? And that is very important. In a previous module, we looked at the difference between management and leadership. And this is very important here, that as a leader, you have an important role to play in resolving conflicts within your organization. And so I have listed here 5 key points that we can take with us, that will be necessary when we confront conflicts and when we attempt to resolve the conflicts that we are confronted with. So importantly, as a leader, you need to learn to listen effectively. We identified earlier on that when a conflict arises, it is important to identify what the problem is. And the skill of listening effectively is one of the ways in which we can achieve that goal in identifying what the problem actually is. So we listen effectively. We identify, secondly, specific causes. So you ask yourself, what is the specific cause of the conflict? And it is in identifying the specific cause of the conflict that you could actually determine what strategies can be used to resolve the conflict. Now, you may have one conflict, and the conflict may arise because of different reasons. There may be more than one reason that is influencing that one conflict. If you're able to identify the specific causes, then you are able to then strategize for each of these causes in order to resolve the conflict. Because if we cannot identify all of the specific causes, you may think that you're resolving the problem, because to you, this is caused because this individual does not know their role within the organization, for example. So you've identified that as the cause of the conflict. So you've sat with this person and you've reoriented that person. But this was only one cause, and there are other causes. So solving this one cause will not actually solve the conflict. And so it is important to identify all the specific causes of the conflict. As the leader, you need to take charge and express your own needs. It does not necessarily mean that you are going to be autocratic about the situation, but even in your democracy, that's what the situation calls for. It means you get an opportunity to express your own needs. And so that would be one of the things that would help solve the conflict. View the conflict situation as an avenue for growth, and we identified that in a previous slide. Instead of allowing the conflict to defeat you, or allowing the conflict to defeat the purpose for which you came together in the first place, instead, you should flip it around, look at the positive aspect of the conflict, and realize that the conflict is an avenue for growth. And those of us who have done management studies, when we look at organization growth or growth of enterprises, we understand that a lot of organizations, you look at the crisis stage, organizations go through crisis stages, and every crisis that you overcome is actually an avenue for growth of the organization. So for example, when you start up an organization, for example, when you started off a fisherman's cooperative, you started off you started bringing people together. There was probably the conflict of identity. People were not sure, what would my role be within this organization? When the leader now started to take charge, and people started to take charge of the organization and identified where they fitted into the bigger picture of the organization, that was a means of resolving that conflict. So when we had gone through that stage, when we had gone through that crisis, the identity crisis within the organization, then we now start being able to identify the goals, being able to identify the vision, and you are now in a position to ask yourself, how can I contribute towards achieving the goals? How can I start to contribute towards ensuring that the vision and the mission of the organization is met through my effort? So viewing conflict situations as an avenue for growth is very important in the growth of the organization generally. Then number 5 says, focus on the specific issue with causing escalation. So we've identified the specific causes, and then we ask ourselves now, how do you create a level of escalation? How do you move it along? How do you move it to the next level with the goal of actually resolving it? Okay, so we move on to negotiation. Do we have any questions, any concerns, or can I continue? Are we still hearing me properly?
Yes, we are. By internet, it may be my internet, I'm not sure, but we are, it's a little spotty in and out, but I can hear you. I can hear you very well.
Okay then. So we move on to negotiation. We move on to negotiation, which is a discussion, and we identify what is negotiation. What is a negotiation? It's a discussion aimed at reaching an agreement. So this is why I said in the beginning that it's 4 topics, but the topics are all related to each other. So negotiation is a discussion aimed at reaching an agreement. There is an issue. Let us talk about the issue. Let us decide what we can give and what we can take with the end result of reaching an agreement. It is a discussion that will be used to resolve an issue in a way that is acceptable to the parties involved. So whether it is that we agree to resolve with the greater benefit to one party, whether we create a win-win, whether we create a win-lose, but at the end of the day, it is to resolve an issue in a way that is acceptable. And whilst we negotiate, we compromise with each other in order to reach that goal or that agreement, that acceptable agreement. We compromise with each other. What can I give in order for us to achieve the goal? What can you give up? What can you bring to the table? What can I do for you? What can I do for the organization in order that we can resolve the issue, achieve the goal, and move on? So I have identified in this slide a negotiation process. And there are many theories on negotiation processes, but what I attempted to do was to give us a very simple one that we can basically pick up and go with, and that we can identify with within our organization. So this one gives us 5 steps in the negotiation process. And the first one is preparation and planning. Preparation and planning. And in the previous slides where we looked at conflict, when we looked at identifying the problem, this is where our preparation and planning begins. Okay? So in preparation and planning, we answer some questions. We look at the nature of the conflict. We look at the history of the conflict. We look at what role does negotiation take within solving the conflict. What are the goals of negotiation? Why do you want to negotiate? What is the other party's goal? What information does the other party have? And based on being able to answer these questions, then we develop a negotiation strategy. Secondly, we define the ground rules. As with every organization, as with almost everything we do in a classroom, from the time we went to school as kindergartners, there were classroom rules or there were ground rules. And so within the negotiation process, we must define and identify ground rules. Who will do the negotiation? When will the negotiation take place? Where will the negotiation take place? What are the resources that we have available to us? What is the procedure? Does the organization already have a procedure for negotiation? For example, do we have a grievance procedure for our employees if this is where the conflict has arisen? Is there a process to deal with some level of friction between yourself as a local fisher organization and the ministry or the Department of Fisheries? Is there a process that is already identified? Is it a process that resonates with us? Is there a case where we need to perhaps bring in a new process? Is there a case where we need to develop a process? So we identify and define the ground rules that will guide the process of negotiation. Then we look at clarification and justification. This is where we try to explain so that the parties involved understand. So we explain what the issue is. We amplify the salient points or the most important points, the causes, the points that if you do not look at them, that will not allow us to go past the conflict. We identify these points. We seek clarification and so on. This is the stage, this is that stage. So we clarify and we justify. There are times when we may identify something as the cause of a conflict or something that we need to resolve or negotiate on. But if you actually try to do a justification for it, you realize then that there is no real justification. It may just be a personal thing and not something that actually affects the organization as a whole. So that just the clarification and justification stage will tell us actually whether there is a need to negotiate in that instance. And then we identify the bargaining, then we go to bargaining and problem resolving. So we've justified that there is a genuine problem. And so we begin looking at bargaining and we begin looking at problem solving. Do we give and take? How much can we give? What are we willing to give? Where are we willing to bend? What areas that we are just not going to negotiate on? What areas, because of perhaps organization culture, beliefs and norms and so on, that we cannot bend in this area? But this is the area where there is a level of leeway, whether it is based on rules, whether it is based on regulations, whether it is based on the law, culture, whatever thing that affects the organization going forward. And then after we've done that, we close and we implement. So this is what we've agreed to do. The parties have agreed to do X or the parties have agreed to do Y. We now move to the stage where we formalize and then we implement the decision that is taken out of the negotiation process. Okay, now this process going from 1 to 5 down the line like that, it would be ideal for a process that is very simple in terms of what the conflict is. But of course, we understand that there are conflicts that are a little bit more complicated. And then in those conflicts that are a little bit more complicated, there may be need to perhaps go back up and revise a particular step. So you may think now that you're at the bargaining and problem solving stage, but whilst you're bargaining, something else may come up. And now that this something else may have come up, you may have to go back and plan, or you may have to go back and try to justify the new thing that has come up. Or now that it has come up, you may need to go back and look at your definition, your ground rules, and realize that, okay, now that something new has presented itself or something new has emerged at the bargaining and problem resolving stage, there is need to go back and put ground rules in place. Okay, so whereas it is identified 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's not necessarily that it will happen this way without any glitches along the way. There may be need to go back to a previous stage or to go back and redo or revisit a previous part of the negotiation process. Okay, so a little scenario. In St. Lucia, a little while back, the government took a decision to privatize the sole marketing agency for fish. So we had what was called the St. Lucia Fish Marketing Corporation. They purchased fish from the fishers. Their mandate back in the day when they were set up was to purchase almost everything that the fisher lands. The organization had fallen on some difficult times. There were different reasons have been given for why they were not as efficient and effective as they should have been. So the government of the day stepped in and privatized the agency. Okay, so for the fishers, a conflict arose because we are going to see, we're landing our catch. The government has now privatized the organization without an adequate level of communication with the fishers. And so, how do we sell our fish? What are the processes and the procedures of this new organization? How do we deal with this new organization? Where do we get the information from? These are constant questions, and these continue to be constant questions for the organization. And so perhaps we can just spend a few minutes on that scenario. Maybe one or two persons can identify how would you now, being a member of that organization, a leader within this organization, that your members have come to you and said, look, hey, this is a situation, we know what the situation is. How could you as the organization assist us in solving this problem that we're confronted with? And so the question is it something that the organization would be able to assist the fisher with? And how would you be able to assist the fisher? If you're saying yes, you can assist. And if no, why do you think that it is not a place for your organization to assist in such a scenario? So maybe we can have one or two persons just respond, give some feedback on the scenario presented. Anybody willing to chime in a bit? Hello?
Hello? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, you finished?
No, I was asking, I presented a scenario and I was asking whether somebody wanted to just give us a little feedback on the scenario presented in light of the topic at hand.
Oh, because well, I think you have a very healthy topic at hand dealing with here tonight. Because what I will say is that this is one of the struggles that Fisher Folks organization do have in terms of conflict. And one of the things is how you do deal with conflict, because like for instances where you said that some fisher folks that, who sit on board of our organization, and that organization they is have a business entity, like running a business. Members feel they have some members do feel they have the rights that they could just walk and do what they feel like within that business, and that itself could cause conflicts. They hire the family member to run the affairs of the organization. So that is some of the things I just want to put out there that cause a little more conflict within Fisher Folks organization itself. Like if you have a system, you see no credit system. You put a no credit system in place, and because somebody might know me as the president, they come straight to me and I go straight to the tenant and say, when you see this person come, must give them X, Y, Z, and these are the kind of things I see just happen in terms of creating conflict. But I just, well, I see, I really look at the scenario so good, but I was just more listening in on the topic.
All right.
I know,
Thanks.
hand back to you.
Thanks, Winslow. Anybody else, or can I move on to the next aspect?
I think you could move on. Okay.
Okay. So we look at advocacy, and we define advocacy as public support for or recommendation for particular cause, policy, legislation, etc. Another definition is the activities that aim to influence decisions within the social, political, or economical institutions. So to advocate as a fisher organization, to advocate on behalf of your organization and on behalf of your members is to give a level of, either a level of public support for a particular policy, particular legislation, or to be able to make representation, to present your recommendations on a particular policy position or legislation. Fortunately or unfortunately for us, many of us within the islands especially, well, for all of us, because of the level of change of governments and so on within our countries, there always tends to be a change then in the progress of things. There tends to be a change in policy directions as governments change. And so the constant within that political, that dynamic political environment is the organizations that we are part of, the organizations that represent the interests of our members, the interests of the fishers, the interests of the fishing industries. And so it is our responsibility as fisher organizations, as members of fisher organizations, to be able to do a level of advocacy on behalf of our members, on behalf of our organization, in order that we influence the sort of change that we want to see in terms of policy, in terms of legislation, the change that we want to see in the political, in the economical, in the social environment that we exist in, within the bigger picture of our countries, within the bigger picture of the region, within the bigger Caribbean network of fisherfolk organization environment. And so we are the ones who are then tasked as leaders with the responsibility to speak up and speak on behalf of the persons and the organizations that we represent. And one of the ways that we could do that is through advocacy. We look at on this slide the area highlighted in red almost to the bottom, and the ILO in their definition of what is a cooperative identified this role as one of the roles of a cooperative. And it says providing advice on cooperative policy and cooperative law, including participatory policy and lawmaking, and the impact on cooperatives of taxation policies, labor law, accounting standards, and competition law, amongst others. So this sort of defines or summarizes the advocacy role that a cooperative can play within the bigger realm of things. So we can provide advice on cooperative policy, on fisheries policy. So whether it is the region or the country, they're developing, for example, a code of conduct, a code of ethics for fishermen, for example. As a fisher organization, we can influence the different aspects of the code of ethics. In fact, we can actually influence whether or not there is a code of ethics. The government, the ministry, the Department of Fisheries may not see the need for the code, But do we as the fisher organizations, based on the consultations that we've had with our members, does the CNFO, based on the consultations that they've had with their member organizations and their member countries, do they see a need for putting together a code of ethic? And so even though the ministry department or the government department does not see the need for it, do we as a movement, do we as a network see the need for it? And so if we do see the need for it, what can we do to ensure that we cause a level of influence so that that can actually be created? This is where our advocacy role comes in. It is in things like that that we can either influence to begin a process of change where one has not yet been created, whether it is to update a law or to bring in a new law, a new regulation, a new policy, or when authorities outside of our organization circle, those who influence us and those who we have influence on, have decided to come up with policies and new procedures. How could we influence what are the aspects and what are the things that go into these policies? Because at the end of the day, if we do not carry out our advocacy role, these policies will be implemented. They may affect us adversely because we stayed quiet, we said nothing. So how do we advocate? And that's very important. How do we advocate? And again, like I said, I will go back to something I said earlier, that all of the topics are intertwined. And so there will be things that may appear repetitive in looking at some of them. How do we advocate? We set clear objectives. What do you want to achieve? Why are you advocating? Are you going out there to speak, to make representation for your organization, for making representation sake? Or are you going out there to advocate on behalf of your organization to create a specific change, to achieve a specific goal, to achieve a specific objective? So you ask yourself, what do you want to achieve? What are you advocating about? What are you advocating for? You do that. Secondly, you need to identify the message or the message. What do you need to see?
Right.
And we identify here that your message needs to be clearly articulated. There cannot be any level of ambiguity in what message you are going to bring out. And of course, your message will be clearly tied in with what your clear objective is that you have set. Thirdly, in advocating, you need to identify your audience. Who will you be pitching to? Is it a level of, are we advocating to CNFO? Are we advocating to a local government within a particular country? Is it a regional organization? Is it a global organization? Is it our members? Is the grouping external to our organization? Who is your audience? Does your audience believe in the same position as you? Does your audience align themselves with the policy of your organization? And in listening to that, we can now start to identify the possibility or the areas where conflict might arise. Because if there is difference in position, if there is difference in policies, then conflict may arise. And we have to, if we identify the audience, then we're able to identify whether there is a possible conflict and how do we manage or resolve that conflict in going ahead with our advocacy role. How would your audience influence your position? So importantly here, we must know our audience. Know your audience. The fourth aspect is the action. What are the actions that you need to take in order to meet your objectives? Is it a case where you need to lobby? Is it a case where you need to create a level of engagement? Is there room for negotiation? Is there a space for you at the table in a very peaceful, amicable environment to make your policy position known on behalf of your organization? Or is it a case where there is a level of friction that exists And so then there needs to be another type of action that you need to take in advocating. What channel are you going to use? And in identifying your channel, you ask yourself, what is the most effective channel in this instance? And not the stress on in this instance. Because whereas a channel may work in a particular instance, it may not work in another instance because your audience may have changed. Your objectives may have changed. Do you need just one channel, or is it most effective to use a combination of channels? So, do I sit and pen a letter to the Department of Fisheries, to the Minister, to the Chief Fisheries Officer, to CNFO, to SERMIS? Do I sit down and I pen a letter to them? Do I make a media release? Do I do an open letter? What is the best channel in order to achieve the goal that I have set out to achieve, and in order to minimize or manage the possible conflict that may arise from me carrying out that role? And the other thing you need to identify is, what is the level of frequency of your advocation? Is it something that requires you just to send a letter and then we can work from there? Or is it something that you constantly have to be at, that you constantly have to send a media release, that you constantly have to publish a newsletter? Is it regular advocating? Is it repeat of the same thing? Is it new strategies over a period of time? You need to identify what the frequency is. And just to share with you a little experience. In fact, something that just a few hours ago, just before this meeting started, I was having a conversation with my fellow managers in the other cooperatives, fishermen's cooperatives in St. Lucia. We have been confronted with an issue where because of COVID, the government has been working out stimulus packages for different sectors of the industry. And so an issue came up maybe about a week or two ago with relation to the fishing industry and what level of support will the government give to them. So a news release came out where it was identified by somebody within the government that the fishers would have been in receipt of what they refer to as a fuel voucher, and that the rolling out or the implementing of the program would be that of the fishermen's cooperatives. The news article went on further to state that, in fact, the fishermen's cooperatives were already in receipt of the funds in order to give the level of economic support stimulus from the government to the fishers. So this comes out on the news, and then by the next day, fishers are calling, members are coming, they're asking, why are you all taking so much time to give it to us? Why are you all not processing it? When are we going to get it? And lo and behold, none of the fishermen's cooperatives have ever been consulted on the matter. The National Fisherfolk Organization has not been consulted on the matter, and we do not know where it is at in terms of the process of actually rolling out the stimulus package to the fishers. So of course, all sorts of insults have been slurred at the fishermen's cooperatives, at the leadership of the fishermen's cooperative, because some of the fishers are of the belief that we've received it and we've taken it, or we've done our own business with it and we've not used it in the manner that it is supposed to be used. So in discussion with my board today, we decided that we are going to write to the relevant authorities so that they can, one, come out and clear the air about the situation, to assure the fishers that it is not a case where it has actually been given to the fishermen's cooperative. This is not where the bottleneck has been created. But furthermore, to perhaps be able to identify for the fishers what the program is, when it will be rolled out, who will implement it, and the other specifics that perhaps the fishers need to know in order to sort of tone down the mood that the announcement has created. So for me, I was strong about publishing an open letter to the minister. But I asked my board, I said, you know what? Yes, we're writing, goodwill is writing, but at the end of the day, the action and the eventual result of the action will be one that will benefit the entire sector. And so we can't afford to be selfish about it to say, okay, well, goodwill wrote and we're the trendsetter on this. No. So my next step then was to have a discussion with the other managers of the fishermen's cooperatives. And just like I said this evening, just a little earlier, I sent the draft document to them and requested feedback. And perhaps 2 or 3 of the managers indicated, look here, I do not think that we should go the route of an open letter. Instead, I think we should address and send a letter directly to the minister, privately, as a correspondence, not to the media first. Give him time to address the issue. And perhaps if we do not feel that the issue is addressed in a time that we feel is good enough, then we go the next step, which is going to the media. And then we can say, well, look here, we had presented that to the minister, we've not gotten a response, and so we're bringing it to the media in the hope of perhaps getting some level of redress from the minister. And so that was some level of analyzing the action that was going to be taken and a level of discussion that happened in order to determine what was the best channel to use to make advocation on behalf of the fishers. Okay, so we're coming almost to the end of it. We're looking at the final topic under the series, which is representation. And you see I have here, prepare, prepare, prepare. And I've repeated that in many of the previous slides. We need to adequately prepare to represent our organizations. And I just listed here some very important points that we need to take into consideration in advocating, in negotiation, in representing the organization. You are going out there to represent the organization, not yourself. So whereas I felt strongly about doing an open letter, it was not about me. And so my personal feelings about the issue at hand should not take center stage in doing the advocation on behalf of the organization. It's not about me, it's not about you, it's about the organization. In representing the organization, you must always bear in mind that you're articulating the organization's position and not your own personal position. So as a board of an organization, you sit down, everybody may have their different personal opinions, but at the end of the day, we put the motion to a vote. We've taken a decision, a collective decision. The majority has taken the majority has influenced a particular decision. There is consensus in the boardroom. When whether you were the one who were of the opposing view, the fact that there is consensus in the decision and the decision binds all of us, when we go out there to represent the organization, then we represent that position, not your personal position that we discussed in the boardroom prior to taking the decision. Okay? Ensure that you have proper personal deportment. So you want persons to respect you as the person representing the organization. You have to basically look the part. There has to be proper personal deportment, both physical deportment, both in the way, in terms of how you articulate what the issue is that you're making representation on, and other aspects of the presentation. And I cannot stop but reiterating, do not make it personal, and not just in terms of personal from your point of view, but whoever your audience is. It's not about them. It's not about the minister. It's about the policy. It's about the policy position. It's about the issue. It's not about the person. Make representation and advocacy, so that's explained further. make representation and advocacy on issues and policy positions, not individuals. Okay, so that sort of brings us to the end of the presentation. And then I have a few topics of discussion here that we can ponder on, that we can ponder on as we get to the end of the presentation, where persons will get an opportunity to give some feedback. Have you ever represented your organization? How did you do it based on your own assessment? Did you do it the correct way? What was the feedback from the other members of your organization on how you represented the organization? What was the feedback from the audience that you made the representation or the advocacy presentation to? What are the areas of advocacy and representation that a fisher organization can lead on behalf of its members? So these are some questions that we can talk about, that can be points of discussion. And in conclusion, just to sum up the 4 topics, we need to understand that our members need a voice, and also that there is power in numbers and respect for organization. And this was the basis upon which many of our organizations were formed, bearing in mind that the individual on his or her own may not have been able to stand up on their own as an individual to create the kind of change that they want, that needed to happen within the sector. And so that is why we came together, so that there is a pool of resources, and that there is greater clout in us coming together as a grouping. We also need to remember that there are matters or issues and policies that need to be addressed to better the industry, and that is where we come in to advocate and represent on behalf of the organization. Fisher organizations have a responsibility to advocate for and represent their members, and that in doing all of this, conflict will arise due to differences in opinions, values, and interests. And on the next slide, which is the last slide, I just put all of this for you in a diagram. And remember, I said it at one point when we looked at the negotiation process, I said that sometimes you have to go back to a previous step. So this organization basically sums that up and identifies for us that the whole process of conflict resolution, conflict management, negotiation, advocacy, it is an ongoing process. It is an ongoing process. As situations come up, we analyze situations, we identify what the issues are, we set goals, we analyze the policies, we identify who are we making the advocacy to, where is the level of influence and power, where does it lie? We develop the what, the how we're going to say what we need to say. We develop persons and capabilities and capacities within the organization. We develop and implement action plans. After we've developed and implemented an action plan, we start right back and analyzing, how did I do it? Was it effective? Is there a requirement to do more? And the cycle continues on a regular and daily basis. So I have come to the end of my presentation for tonight on the topics of advocacy, conflict, representation, and negotiation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well,
You are very well.
Thank you, madam. It was a very, very, very good,
I think
very good and informative presentation. And I particularly look forward to seeing this in writing and recorded so that it could be disseminated among our membership. It's actually very good. I enjoyed it immensely.
Thank you.
I second that motion, and I was planning on requesting that very same thing, because I think it was a very, are you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Okay. I thought it was a very, very well planned presentation. I thought it was very timely, and it speaks to some of the issues that we in Turks and Caicos have been confronted with. I wanted to explain a situation that we had to resolve not very long ago. We haven't completely done so, but we are getting there. And before the end, how much more time we have? So because I can do that as soon as a few other people have engaged in some of the discussions.
Maybe Nadine can give us a cue.
Okay. But I think it was an incredible effort. So thank you very much.
You're most welcome, and thank you.
Okay.
Nadine?
Nadine?
Yes, my dear, I'm here.
Oh, waiting for a cue from you.
Right. So Miss Kaygianna is facilitating, so she is going to do question and answers and discussion. We have.
You were asking in terms of a time check, Nadine.
15, I will say about 15 minutes because we started a little late, so we can go a little few minutes over. About
All right.
15 minutes for that session.
Okay. So anybody, any concerns? Anybody wants to add anything, say anything, ask any questions? We can go ahead with that.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed your presentation. I think you covered all of the aspects, the negotiation, the advocacy. I think that all of us really need to stress on the advocacy because that's the first step in getting what we want. And I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. Very impressed.
Thank you, Suzanne.
I appreciate the final slide with the graph, with the charts.
Mm-hmm.
It will really help when it comes on to us planning our strategy.
Okay, great.
Okay, you did well, as usual.
Thank you, Rita.
Well, I think the presentation was wonderful. I enjoyed every moment of it. And basically, it is teaching me how to deal with conflict and how to solve conflicts, because there are many times when conflict arises, we as human beings, we don't know to deal with the conflict or how to negotiate a conflict to get the justification out of the conflict. So it was well presented, and my first time listening, well, I enjoyed every moment, and I think there's a lot more for me to learn.
It was nice having you, Desmond, and hope to see you on the other, when we do the other module. And importantly, that we identified that conflict is something, like I said in the very first slide, it's something that is inevitable. No matter how well we think that we're managing an organization, or no matter how well of a leader we think we are, because of the dynamics of an organization, there will always be conflict. But the important thing, like I stress, is being able to manage the conflicts so that we do not create, it doesn't have a lasting negative impact on the longevity of our organizations, or on the core basis of values of our organization.
Is there any other comments? I am very sorry. I really did not give good information. We are way over time. Persons did not have a good chance to interact. So if there is any more thing, we can, I think, entertain that maybe for the next 5 minutes or so. Satisfied?
Okay, all right.
Nadine?
Yes, Adrian. Any questions for Kaygianna or any discussion? Go ahead.
No, just a comment. I think it's a good reflection on the way the sessions have been running, that we are able, well, that we do run overtime a little bit because they're very interesting and it shows the interaction and involvement. They've been very good. I appreciate all of this.
Right, I agree, Adrian. This was a very heavy topic. I think one of the heaviest of them all, and that's why it needed so much time. So jump in, please feel jump in if you have anything else to say. I would like a short minute from Kaygianna just to wrap up after our comments and so on. So if you have anything, just feel free to jump in.
Okay, just briefly, the cooperatives in TCI was having a bit of a glitch, and as you indicated, these issues could have arisen and do arise from the fact that we have change in governments every now and then. The previous one didn't recognize our existence, and when we try to negotiate to see if we can come up with the best deal for our members, we were told that, look, this cooperative thing is very new, and what do we do with the persons who were involved with fisheries years before this cooperative model showed up? And so our response is that, well, they've made enough money, and here is the opportunity for those persons who are right at the end of the totem pole. You know, fisher folk very rarely amass a lot of wealth from this activity. And so we try to convince them the reason why it was important for them to support the fisher folk. As Mitch would know, we tried to get some land quickly to build a fish plant because everybody was excited over the prospect of having the opportunity to export fish and benefit from the second round of production, would be called a second hand. Everybody would have been, the local fisher folk would have been selling their catch at a reasonable rate to the firm, to the co-op, and they would have, of course, owned a big share depending on what they are coming up with. And everyone was excited over that. We asked for some land and was in the process of getting the land. And finally they said, okay, you can have 2.5 acres somewhere else. And then the government lost, and we discovered that just not very long ago that the land was mutated and given out to party supporters. So, you know, we were pretty outraged. And so we decided, on the advice, that the best way to advocate to get involved and to benefit at the maximum was to try and get a memorandum of understanding from the government. And that took us months. In fact, we only just finished it about a month ago. Even when we were locked down. But one of the things we asked for is that one of the fisher folk be a member of the Fisheries Advisory Council, so that some of the things which the government departments overlooked, we would have someone in there to advocate and to represent on our behalf. And that's exactly what happened. So we were advised to make a representation to own some land somewhere else. Meanwhile, the fish house that the previous government had built was not custom made. And so we were told that, look, it seems to me that you may be in business because you may be tasked with the responsibility to upgrade the building and sort of retrofit it in a way to be able to serve the wishes of the fisher folk who are using it. And so right now what we are doing is going back to our original vision and mission, because we have, of course, recognized the need for gender inclusion. We just recently took in some ladies and they are ready to go, so we should be really on the right track in the near future. But we had to do some representation, and that's why I look at the term representation, and representation representation and advocacy would be the umbrella for all the rest of that to be achieved. And that's what I wanted to say in respect of this presentation, which I think was excellent.
Okay.
All right.
It's nice that you shared this little anecdote with us, because it actually speaks to, like you said, a lot of what we looked at tonight. And it speaks to the question of, was it a case where you needed to advocate just this one time? But in your case, it means that you needed to do some follow-up advocacy in order to be able to maintain what the fishers required so that you could have moved forward. And so it's applaudable that the cooperative, the organization in this case, used that role that we're supposed to play in order to achieve what you had set out to achieve with the TCI, and that's commendable.
Yeah. Thank you.
Miss Kaygianna?
Yes, Nadine?
I am aware of time. I have three things. I want to find out for the purpose of recording this person's name, who is Galaxy A20. The person with his video on with the name Galaxy A20. I need to know who that is, if it's possible for me to find out now. Okay, I will find out another way. I want to quickly, I know we lost some persons, but they messaged that they have connectivity problems. I myself fell out twice. But I just wanted, because Adrian mentioned about getting like a report on this, so I will try to do a good summary, of course, from the recording. But persons did not join the Google Classroom, so I just want to take 1 minute on that, because today we tried for orientation and not everyone came to the orientation. So I just wanted to take 1 single minute. I won't take long, it's very late, to say that if I quickly share my screen, and maybe not, that the Google Classroom, I will do that after this because I don't want to waste any more time. The Google Classroom exists, and we have a good wealth of information on this topic in there. We have the book again. We have the leadership book. We have, we will have this presentation there. We have advocacy plan. We have good stuff. So I will work with you in the week and next week to access that information. So it exists already, Adrian, for you to look in the Google Classroom. Not many people did that. I think only 3 persons registered, but we will do that at another time. And the last thing, because we lost people, and I want the most persons on this, I want to do a quick picture. So if you have the capability to put on your video, if you can do that, and we'll end. Please, I will ask. If you can't, then that's fine. But who can put on your video? Winsbert, Miss Sylvia, Mitch, if you wish, Adrian, there's one. Winsbert, yeah, Mr. Terrence, whoever. If you don't have a picture, I appreciate, like Doc, you have a nice picture, so that's good. Mr. Gary, you don't have to. Pastor, you don't have to. But I would appreciate it. Adrian, you sure I could take that picture? I need you to give me a background. Like you see mine, a virtual background. All right, that's it. That's enough. No pressure, but if you can, we'll appreciate it. I already gave the reason in the WhatsApp earlier today. So I'll do a print, how you call it, a screenshot. Winsbert, can you come on, Winsbert? Rita, come back on, Rita, man. I want to see you. Kaygianna, you know the lead lady, man.
I am not sure what is going on there.
Kaygianna, I need a picture. I need your face. Put on your video, Kaygianna.
I am trying to do that. I'm clicking on it. I'm not sure why it's not allowing me to do it.
Oh, maybe
You
your
got me, Nadine?
screen or something.
I am not sure why.
Okay. All right. Take off your video so you can put back the picture that was there. I want to know who is Galaxy A20.
Desmond is here. Can you see a background of me? Desmond?
I see you. Desmond, you're looking good. You're okay. Bring a face forward to the screen so I could see you better. Who is Galaxy A20? You know who that?
Nadine, can you see me?
Yes, Rita, you're looking beautiful. Desmond, you know who is Galaxy A20?
No, I don't have any idea. I'll do some
All right.
investigation on that.
No problem. You could smile now. 1, 2, 3. This is the picture now. Miss Green, bring your face to the camera. I want to see your face. Miss Green. Good night, Miss Green. We're not to see you good.
Huh?
Miss Green, we're not to see your face good. We want to see your face.
Yeah.
All right, smile. This is the last one. 1, 2, 3. Beautiful. Thank you for killing the last few minutes with me. We'll circulate that. It's for the newsletter of Stewardfish and maybe on our social media pages. So I appreciate you putting on your video for that purpose. So back to you, Miss Kaygianna, to conclude.
Yes. So is somebody else speaking?
I was going to ask her the background of her. Is that a fish sanctuary or something?
That is this is Belize, and this is a picture of our cooperative. It's right in the city on the river, and it's the back of the cooperative.
Okay.
It's not a river.
Okay, that's beautiful.
This is a key. Sorry, this is Belize though. This is where I took a picture of the keys.
Okay.
Yeah,
so I just want to say thank you to everybody. I too thoroughly enjoyed making the presentation and preparing for the presentation. I thank you for the feedback. It was well received. And my hope is that we will take something, at least one thing from it that we can bring back to our cooperative to create some massive change within our cooperative in terms of our role as advocates and representatives of our fishing organizations, because we are the ones who are charged with the responsibility, along with our colleagues, to ensure that we move the cooperative and we move the sector within our individual societies, within our individual countries to the next level. So I just want to thank everybody, and I want to thank CNFO for the opportunity that was given to me to facilitate this module tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're most welcome.
Adrian, I sent you a comment on your chat. I hope you read it.